Let's compare Apple's iPhone 13 Pro Max against the brand new Samsung S22 Ultra. Welcome everybody to Apple Insider. It is Andrew here, and you can find me on Twitter at Andrew_OSU. If you have not taken the time to do so already, be sure to subscribe and enable those notifications so you don't miss any of my videos. Now, there's not much better than flagship phone day, and I am excited because I just got my hands on the new Samsung S22 Ultra, the flagship of Samsung's flagships. And I'm going to be comparing this massive phone against Apple's own massive phone, the iPhone 13 Pro Max. So I'm going to dig into everything from displays to battery life to performance, and if it helps at all, I've gone ahead and put chapter markers in this video so you can skip down below to the sections that you care about, and then join me at the end for the summary as we break down these two new phones. So let's go ahead and dive into all of this. These two new phones are similar in a lot of ways. The iPhone 13 Pro Max rocks a 6.7-inch LPTO OLED display. The Samsung Galaxy S22 Ultra sporting its own 6.8-inch AMOLED display. Looking at dimensions, the Galaxy S22 Ultra measures in at 6.43 inches tall, 3.07 inches wide, and 0.35 inches thick, and it'll weigh in at 8.08 ounces. If we move over to the iPhone 13 Pro Max, it is very similar. It measures in at 6.33 inches tall, 3.07 inches wide, and 0.3 inches thick. So the iPhone 13 Pro Max is just a little bit thinner and just slightly shorter than the Galaxy S22 Ultra. It also weighs a little bit more though. It tips the scales at 8.47 ounces. It's likely due to the stainless steel frame of the iPhone compared to the body of the S22 Ultra. The S22 Ultra has a gorgeous display. As I mentioned, it is 6.8 inches with a resolution of 3088 by 1440. The iPhone 13 Pro Max, on the other hand, has a 6.7-inch display measuring at 2778 by 1284. Apple's iPhone 13 Pro line was upgraded to a new maximum brightness of 1200 nits. That's the peak brightness for watching back HDR content. But Galaxy ups the ante even further with a maximum of 1750 nits. But again, that is only while watching back HDR content, high dynamic range content, and their bright burst on the screen, such as an explosion or looking directly into the sun. In day-to-day use though, it wasn't quite so clear. I couldn't tell much of a difference, but under microscopes and with other laboratory testing, Phone Arena was able to come up with some neat numbers that showed that the iPhone actually had better typical brightness in daily use compared to what the Galaxy S22 Ultra did. If you go outside of the automatic brightness though, if you dig into the settings on the Galaxy S22 Ultra, you can turn off automatic brightness and turn on brightness boost, which will give you even a brighter display, though it can take a toll on your battery. Both of these great looking phones offer 120 Hz refresh rates on the displays, though how they manage those displays is done slightly differently. Apple's way of handling a 120 Hz refresh rate manages to go from 10 to 120 Hz based on whatever you're doing on the display. It can happen like at a moment's notice, such as just scrolling on the display versus staring at a stock image. But Samsung doesn't do it quite as efficiently, and it takes a little bit more of a toll on battery life. But Samsung is able to drop all the way down to 1 Hz on its refresh rate, which makes it great for probably my favorite feature on the S22 Ultra, which is the always-on display. The display can always be on with an incredibly low refresh rate, giving you a good idea of clocks, your time, your notifications, and even music that is currently playing. I love the always-on display, and I really hope that Apple implements something similar on the iPhone 14 line. It's seriously something that I've wanted for a long time that Android phones have been able to do. And now that Apple does have that variable refresh rate display in there, it should be able to drop that refresh rate down to 1 Hz and give us the always-on display that I've been asking for. A couple other cool features of the S22 Ultra is on that display has an in-screen fingerprint reader, so you can use facial recognition or the fingerprint reader. That said, the facial recognition is still not nearly as secure as Face ID. It's still a 2D representation of your face that's comparing to its own images, and it's not as secure as the 3D depth map that Apple is able to glean using the infrared projector in Face ID. Samsung even doesn't recommend facial recognition as the most secure way of protecting your phone. For that, you should go with a longer password or something else. But it is nice that you have the option to choose between facial recognition, fingerprint, passcode, or a pattern. Finally, the S22 also has support in its display for the S Pen, so you can pull the S Pen out of the corner and go ahead and write on your phone screen. It is really, really cool, and I love that they have this just built in to the phone itself. So that's another change in the display from the S22 Ultra to the iPhone 13 Pro Max. It's time to talk about all of those little cameras. Cameras can be a differentiator in smartphones, but as time marches on, the cameras have only gotten better. And this year is a year of trade-offs. There are some areas where the iPhone clearly wins out, and there are others where the S22 Ultra wins on its own. So let's go ahead and talk about these a little bit more in granular detail, going camera to camera. We're going to start with the main lens on each of these. The iPhone is using 12 megapixel sensors across the board, but its sensor on the iPhone 13 Pro Max is the largest sensor that is ever created. So this sensor is a 12 megapixel sensor with an f1.5 aperture. On the other hand, the Galaxy S22 Ultra has a 108 megapixel camera with an f1.8 aperture. It has increased the aperture size a little bit on the S22 compared to the S21, and it does improve with low light situations, but in standard photography, I still think the iPhone 13 Pro Max wins out with its better depth of field and its wider aperture. But when you start to get into the zooming with those lenses, that's a whole other story, but more on that in just a moment. Apple is also using sensor shift stabilization for the iPhone 13 Pro Max versus optical image stabilization on the Galaxy S22 Ultra. Normally, I would say the sensor shift stabilization works better, but Samsung did a lot of job to improve its stabilization algorithms from year over year. So I do think the stabilization is much better in my limited time with the S22 Ultra than it was with the S21 Ultra. For the ultra-wide lens, Apple is sticking with another 12 megapixel sensor, this time an f1.8 aperture. Samsung is also using a 12 megapixel lens, but with an f2.2 aperture. Apple's lower aperture value means more light is coming in, and it's clear that the iPhone's ultra-wide lens does better in low light. This was a huge problem area for Apple with the iPhone 12 Pro Max, with its pretty bad aperture and low light performance on that ultra-wide lens. So it's no surprise here that the ultra-wide lens does better in low light than what we're seeing on the Samsung. For the telephoto lens, Samsung now has two telephoto lenses, a 3x zoom and a 10x optical zoom. On the iPhone, Apple still only has the one tele-lens, but Apple's is a 12 megapixel versus Samsung's 10. Despite that, the fact that Apple only has a 3x optical zoom means it is terrible with zoom compared to that of the S22 Ultra. Samsung wins, hands down, when it comes to telephoto photography on the S22 Ultra compared to the iPhone. 3x optical zoom is just not great, and Samsung just easily wins. That said, in just a couple of the sample photos I took, the S22 Ultra looks like it's over-sharpening some of the photos, and iPhone saturation I still think is better. The overall tone of the photos looks more natural and a little bit warmer compared to a cooler tone on the Samsung this year. iPhone also has ProRes and ProRAW formats that Galaxy doesn't have. So if you're a professional looking to use the iPhone for some professional shoots, those may be differentiators. Now it's time to look inside the phones and talk about those internals. For the S22 Ultra that I have here, Samsung is using a 4nm Snapdragon 8 Gen 1 chipset. There are other versions with its own in-house silicon, but in this case, that's the model that I'm testing. Apple's of course using the A15 Bionic processor, its own in-house silicon, on the iPhone 13 Pro Max. If we go ahead and look at Geekbench, we can compare how that performance works, at least in a standardized setting. In the latest version of Geekbench, the S22 scored a 1244 in the single-core test and a 3610 in the multi-core test. These were nowhere near the performance of the iPhone 13 Pro Max, which scored a 1726 in the single-core and a 4712 in the multi-core. Apple continues to dominate with its own silicon. The degree in performance improvements year over year for Apple Silicon has started to decrease, but its performance is still well ahead of the competition. There are benchmarks like the graphics benchmark, but Apple's using Metal versus not Metal on Android, so it's harder to compare some of those performance things. It really comes down to actually using the phones, and the best thing that I can say is that they are both blazing fast and work great. Snapdragon processors are highly recommended on Android handsets, and of course you don't have options when it comes to Apple, you're just using Apple Silicon. Both these phones are great, though I do expect that the iPhone's processor will last longer in the future. It has a lot of headroom right now, and they just tend to have longer lifespans overall. That leads us to battery life. Apple made a big deal about the battery life on the iPhone 13 Pro Max, and unfortunately it seems like Samsung could not keep up. I have not had enough time to test these out, but Phone Arena got access to these phones early and did a dedicated battery test, so I'm just going to give you some of their results that they got. When it comes to gaming, both of these phones were on par with each other, like we do the 120Hz refresh rates and the graphics power of them. But when it came to normal, typical performance, the iPhone easily had a leg up. Just looking at watching YouTube, the Galaxy S22 Ultra only got 7 hours and 27 minutes while streaming YouTube, versus 10 hours and 23 minutes on the iPhone 13 Pro Max. The iPhone 13 Pro Max has a great battery life, and it is no surprise that it's winning on almost all the battery tests that have been thrown at these two devices. It's still going to vary based on what you're doing with the devices, but I think it's pretty easy to say that the iPhone 13 Pro Max has the superior battery. One way the iPhone can't keep up with battery though is with charging. The S22 Ultra can accept power at up to 45 watts, which is incredible. The iPhone 13 Pro Max doesn't get close to that, and it shows in how long it takes to charge the phones. An S22 Ultra can fully charge in only about an hour, just a hair over an hour, whereas the iPhone 13 Pro Max takes a full 2 hours to charge up. That's a big difference between these two devices. Okay, let's round this up, guys. These two phones are both incredible. You honestly can't go wrong with either of them. And I think when you're buying in, you tend to know what you're looking for. Especially on the high end, you likely know that you want an Android handset versus an iOS handset. And that's okay. You can like what you like, and I'm not going to tell you otherwise. But there are distinct areas where each of these phones wins out. This year, the iPhone is still miles ahead in terms of performance, and its battery life is top notch. The Galaxy, on the other hand, is doing a great job, and I love the itty-bitty tiny bezels around the edge of the display, and the built-in S Pen and the incredible zoom in the photos. But which of those is more important? That's harder to say. I think, again, both of these phones are phenomenal, and I applaud the teams on each side for what they have done here. I am more excited than ever to be testing these phones out, and I hope you guys stay tuned because I'll have more tests comparing these, especially photos and videos between the S22 Ultra and the iPhone 13 Pro Max in the coming days. Let me know which you guys think, which one you prefer, which one you think did a better job down below in the comments or on Twitter at Andrew_OSU. And if you'd like to grab either of these, we started to put some deals down below in the description. Otherwise, stay tuned, and I'll see you guys in the next video.